Welcome back after the break. As I told you, we're going to talk about the tensions between the US and Europe nowadays and how the world looks like. So I hope that you have predicted which four I'm going to be talking about. Actually, if you go ahead in the slides, you're going to be able to see them. But we depart from this idea that actually there's some kind of tension between the US and its natural allies in Europe because of a very clear reason nowadays. That is American first foreign policy. If we talk about the current administration, this has escalated tension between both sides of the Atlantic. But I have to tell you that this is not something new. There were tensions before, for example, with the war in Iraq. France and Germany highly criticized the Bush administration during the war in the 90s. We go back to the war in the former republics of Yugoslavia. We can see how Europe and the US disagreed on the strategy to pursue and whether this was an European issue or the US should intervene as well. And we can keep going back in history and there will be many tensions between both sides of the Atlantic. Remember, for example, when Jacques Chirac opposed to the UK entering the European Union, that was because actually he thought that it was a Trojan horse of the United States and he didn't want the influence of the US. So tension between both sides of the Atlantic is not something new. It's something that it has existed over time and we've always been able to deal with it. As I was saying, nowadays because of media, this might seem a bit over exaggerated, but it's not as bad. It's not that the US and Europe are going to break apart and we're going to walk in different directions. In some fields we do walk in different directions, but that's absolutely normal. We are not the same country. So, American first foreign policy, very different perception of the multilateral order. And obviously this relates with something that we're going to be talking on Monday. On Monday I told you that we're going to be talking about culture and particularly about a book that explains really well how liberalism and realism drive European and American foreign policy respectively. And obviously this results in on different outcomes. But at the end of the day, interests are different, so outcomes are going to be different for sure. So, US, since Trump took office, have been withdrawing from different agreements. So it's been switching from a more liberal approach to international relations to even a more realist approach to international relations. We can talk about Paris Agreement, Trans-Pacific Partnership, we can talk about the Human Rights Council, or we can talk about UNESCO, how in this case was related to Israel. So, yeah. But at the end of the day, it's a different way of playing. So we can talk about climate change. In June 2017, the United States withdrew from the Paris Agreement. And obviously that was fundamental because if you did the exercise of identifying the key issues in the world right now, I think you've all given 10 priority or at least over 8 priority to climate change. And climate change is clear that needs global responses. And if we are missing such a relevant actor as the US, there's very little that the rest of the world can do there. So how can the European Union influence the United States to go back to Paris Agreement? There's very little room for that. Because first thing, we have problems of coordination between European countries. Remember, foreign policy is a coordinating policy, it's not integrated in the European Union institutions. So you have to get the 27 to agree on a common action against the US. So what can we do? We can continue business as usual, at least do as much as we can. We talked with this new commission, we have a commissioner for a new Green Deal, so that's the approach to climate change. Or actually, for example, individual countries can take the initiative, as was the case of France. In the G9 summit that took place last spring, they introduced climate change into the agenda of the summit as one of the most relevant issues for the superpowers of the world to address. Another of the issues that France added to the G9 summit was Iran. Iran has been a source of tension over the last years, particularly since the US pull out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was an agreement signed with Iran in 2015 to prevent them from further developing their nuclear project. In return for Iran not enriching uranium anymore and dismantling its nuclear production plants that will be supervised by international observers, the US and Europe and China and Russia, so that's why we say P5 plus one, because that last plus one, didn't say it, is the European Union as one single actor, which was actually relevant. In return for Iran taking this measure to dismantle their nuclear plant, these actors will release the sanctions they had over Iran. So by the end of the day, this is clear liberal policy. By the end of the day, you were using economic sanctions. You were using a multilateral organization. Well, not organization, but by the end of the day, you were using soft power. You were using trade, and you're releasing this, and you're engaging in diplomacy once again to try to solve this issue. What happened? May 2018, President Trump understood that Iran was not fulfilling its obligations as it was agreed in 2015, so he was pulling back of the agreement and he was restoring these sanctions in Iran. What can Europe do here once again? Very little. Individual efforts, like the French ones that I mentioned on the G9 summit, but then, I mean, by the end of the day, European Union is an economic power, that's clear. But the sanctions that the US imposed on Iran are too big for European sanctions. European Union releasing the sanctions are too small. There is not a big enough incentive for Iran not to continue the nuclear projects. So at the moment, we don't really know what is going to happen on that issue and whether the European Union is going to be able to bring the US back on board, because it has very little leverage when negotiating with the US. Next cause of tension, clearly trade. I mean, by the end of the day, Donald Trump himself has been talking about a trade war, and this is the case with Europe. Since he took office, he imposed, first he attacked China, then he faced the European Union and imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum. Because, by the end of the day, actually, you remember that I told you in class that WTO had ruled against the European Union, in this case of Airbus, and subsidizing the aerospace industry in Europe. Actually, Trump was kind of right in that sense. We're going to talk about this in more depth in the class about economic relations. But what Europe did, how European Union respond to this, because by the end of the day, if you're seeing this, it's very interesting, because always the Trump administration taking the initiative and then the European Union going behind it, responding to it. So how did the European Union respond in this field? In this field, we are integrated, so actually we talk as one single voice, remember, one single market, and in this case we imposed tariffs on specific goods, and we also applied safeguard measures to European industry to try to compensate for the losses because of the Trump tariffs on these aluminum and steel. And these are, it's an ongoing issue. When we talk about trade and economic relations, we're going to talk about other tariffs that were imposed afterwards. So, and actually it's quite interesting how the tariffs that the European Union imposed on American goods, they are focused on goods that are produced in swing states that actually can cost electorally to Trump when the elections come by the end of the year. And last but not least, something that we also mentioned, that is NATO, and the current and the tension came from Trump understanding that other allies were not investing enough in defense, so they were free riding and they were using the US investment as if it was their own, and they will be able to invest on welfare. You remember the first day of class how we were playing this game that you had to invest in military and welfare? Actually, European Union countries, Trump understood they were free riding in that game because of being allies with the US. They had the security guaranteed. And this is actually shaking the tree of NATO and is reshaping the relation in military, and this has really resulted on what we talked about in the last class before the end of the first half of the semester, on Europe taking more initiative in military affairs, but on its own military affairs, developing the European military, the Agency for Security in Europe, and bringing up the idea of further cooperating in defense and investing on the military research through PESCO funding. So as you can see, quite a few issues here, and by the end of the day, once again, I want to tell you this idea that tensions have always existed on both sides of the Atlantic. What is important is that we share culture, we share values, and we share security concerns. And this culture, we're going to be addressing it next week. So have a nice weekend and hope you're doing well. Bye.